No matter what year you graduated, or if you're still in the Corps now, I'd be willing to bet on your very first day, somebody said something to the effect of, look to your left, look to your right. The people you see there will be your friends for the rest of your life, those who make it through. And that ends up being true. You and your cadre become friends. You and your rook buddies are brothers and sisters. You end up being in each other's weddings, maybe being stationed together around the military, different jobs around the country. Help each other through the good times or support each other through the good times. And the bad times hit too. You never think they will, but they do to everybody. Maybe not all of the bad things that can go happen, but 2 or 3 of them will hit: financial trouble, relationship trouble, career trouble, something. And for those times, we're there for each other as well. But there's another guy who is always there for all of us. And I'm talking about Reverend Bill Wick. He is my guest today. I've known him a long time. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of interesting things, a little bit about his history at Trinity, where he went to school, and then how he ended up at Norwich, the sheer number of weddings and funerals that he has done. I asked him how cadets' challenges have changed over the last 30 years and what they're dealing with now. And I also asked him about us, the grads. How have our challenges changed over the last 30 years when he gets that call in the middle of the night or maybe during the day just for some advice? So we talk about that and what people are dealing with today. I also bring up a story from almost 30 years ago with him about some voodoo, demonic stuff to see if he remembers it. And I was unsurprised to see that he did. So we talk about that a little bit as well. I'm going to drop you in the conversation right when he answered the phone or shortly thereafter. We set this up. He said, call me at 2000, so I did. He answered the phone. I said, Reverend Wick, it's Randy. He said, Randy who? Wait, which Randy?
Since when do you call me Reverend?
I don't know. What did I call you?
Rev.
No, what did I call you just now?
Reverend.
Did I say Reverend Wick or just Reverend?
You said Reverend Wick.
Oh, well, that's not as weird if I would have just said Reverend.
So, Mr. Miller.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Miller, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Am I catching you? Is this the right time?
It's the right time, my friend. You're absolutely right.
You had me going for a minute.
I'm just busting your chops, that's all.
I know, you had me going for a minute, and I was like, he totally forgot. He totally forgot we were going to talk.
No. I can tell you something true. I watch some of these publications for clergy, the Reverend. So why do they go the Reverend? Why do they do that kind of stuff?
I've always, wondered when,
or the most Reverend, or the come on.
When does the doctor or Reverend come first or second? I've seen that done both ways.
I guess it's Reverend Doctor. How they do it that way if you do it, but
one would think that you would hold the divinity degree higher than.
Well, yeah, and some guys who get their doctorate shouldn't, because all they do is run an ego trip.
Or you find out it's an honorary degree.
Well, yeah, that's true.
I'm sorry, but honorary degrees weren't meant to be used, really. Dwayne Johnson has a bunch of honorary degrees. He doesn't go by Dr. Rock.
Well, yeah, and I was urged a number of years ago to get my doctorate. I said, look, I'll get a second master's if I do anything, because I'm not a doctoral material. I mean, the guys in my profession who were doctorates, my next-door neighbor in seminary, knew Greek, Hebrew, Latin, French, German, English. I said that.
I was going to ask you, I remember talking to you about your studies at Trinity, right?
Right.
Right, and this was Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic. Like, this was some pretty heavy academic stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, I didn't do the Aramaic. I wanted to get my training in the Old Testament and New Testament languages. There is a small section of the Old Testament, particularly in Daniel, that had an Aramaic section, but the Old Testament was in Hebrew, the New Testament in what was called Koine Greek. It was the common Greek of the first century, and I would say I'm a turtle on that. I use it in all my sermons, but I'm not a sprinter. I can do the research, and I can certainly understand commentaries and technical points for scholars who are far more than I ever hoped to be, make a point, and I say, I see what you're saying. But I wanted to be able to get as close to the original and the nuances as possible. So, yeah, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School I went to because I had seen a lot of reviews on their professors and their writings, and they were very solid in biblical exposition and taking the text seriously, how to apply it practically, and that has kind of been true. I've been very thankful for what I got there, and even my undergraduate studies in Kansas City, which got me started.
Now, what did you major in as an undergrad?
Biblical studies.
Okay.
But I began in Kansas City at a small college and transferred out into my junior year to Trinity College in Deerfield, Illinois. And right across the street from that was Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. But the whole thing is called Trinity University now, which has both the undergraduate and the graduate school there. But that's all. That was back in the last millennium. That was back in the 1900s.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, going back there, how did you end up at NU, and what do you remember about your very first time on campus?
Well, I had the privilege for some 20 years of being what was called a church planter, where you go to a spot where there was a need for a local church, go bivocationally, support yourself, get some Bible studies started, build a group, and eventually hope to establish a church. So I had begun in 1978 in Bradford, Vermont, on the Connecticut River, and then I was there for 8 years. I was asked by 8 people after the Bradford church had gotten about 150, they came down and were looking for a church planter for up in Newport, and so I left a church of about 150 to go to 8 people and assist them in starting a church in Newport, and then was there for 3 years, and in marrying Deborah, I had resigned the church and was unemployed for a while, worked in a funeral home for a few months, and then there was a group of people from the Abare Evangelical Free Church, pastored by a colleague of mine from the seminary, Neil Aborn, who wanted to spin off a smaller group and have a church closer to their home here in Northfield, so they were looking for a church planter for here. So technically, I came down at their request to assist them in starting what was Grace Church, and since it was a small group of people there, only about 20 people, I had to find other employment, and Craig Sullivan mentioned that Norwich was looking for a part-time chaplain, so I took my resume to our dear friend Tim Donovan,
who at the time
on his desk,
Commandant of Cadets at the time, and that was that a direct report to him? So that was he was the direct hire for he was the search committee. He was the search committee.
It was his call to decide who would come in. Probably that would not be the case anymore. I'm sure that most decisions at our campus are made by committee or a larger group than that. But in that time frame, it was he, and I've told him many times how thankful I am for the honor of the role that we've had now for almost 30 years. But Colonel Donovan was the gentleman who hired me. In fact, I just talked to him this afternoon. I saw a picture of him with Joe Snell and his wife Techie down at the big gala event down in D.C.
So you got a job out of it. You got a good friend in Tim, and you got thousands that you maybe didn't expect.
Well, yeah, my family, including you, my friend, I have a pretty huge family at this point in time, and most of the work that we're honored to do is behind a closed door all day long with one student or two at most. I have public responsibilities like the weekly service in the chapel and then, of course, Norwich events, but most of my time is one-on-one caring for students, and that's probably the way I enjoy most. I didn't go in ministry to climb a ladder or make a name, but just to serve the Lord.
Well, I have known you 30 years, officially. It was fall 89, wasn't it? Class of 93, we were rooks, and you know how they always say, look to your left, look to your right, and I was like, well, Reverend Wick, he was a rook too that year.
Summer, August of 89, that's right. In fact, Deborah and I had married in April. In fact, April Fool's Day is our wedding date. And so we came to Northfield as newlyweds and took on a new wife and her son and her cat, plus my cat, took on a new job at a church and a new job at the university. As far as off the chart for newness and stress, probably I was off the chart on that. But it seems
and you're trying to help other people with newness and stress, right?
Well, I married the right lady.
Perfect.
And, of course, they call her Mrs. Rev, and she's earned that.
Did either of you anticipate at the time that in a sense you would sort of never get rid of us. That sure we would graduate, but that there would be weddings, that there were going to be funerals, and there was going to be people seeking both yours and Deborah's counsel and advice, and we would never go away.
You folks come in for 4 to 6 years, and you leave me behind. You guys have no heart whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it is Norwich forever. Now,
right.
To your question, Randy, I approach every job with the intention that I'll stay there till the Lord moves us on or until I die there. In fact, my cemetery plots up on Dole here at the Norwich Cemetery, so at least part of me is not going to go anywhere.
How many weddings do you think you've done?
By my guesstimation, since I had the honor of beginning the ministry back in 1978, probably close to 300, and probably more than that in terms of funerals. When I was in Bradford working in the wood shop, the foreman, Ned Carter, gave me the nickname Rev, which has stuck for 40-some years now. And when his brother passed away from cancer, Ned said, "Would you do my brother's service?" And I said, "I'd be honored." So got together with the family, put together the service, and did it. What I didn't realize is a lot of clergy have pre-written material they just use for funerals or weddings, and they just plug the person's name in, and that's it. And I've always started from scratch for every sermon, for every wedding, for every funeral, and so I gathered together reflections from Ned and his family on his brother, and well, make a very long story short, since the guy was known very well, and where we had the service was pretty packed, it went through town about how this service was done, and I became the funeral pastor in Bradford. That's kind of continued to this day. I never charge for weddings or funerals. To me, it's an honor to serve in that way. I don't know how pastors can charge folk when they're going through grief. And to your point there, that means that in local towns where there's a family that has no pastor or someone that's unchurched or de-churched, I'm often asked, "Rev, would you do this service for us?" The answer is absolutely, no question. And so I probably have done more funerals than weddings in the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm. How many Norwich weddings would you say you've done? I was trying to estimate.
Well, they've been very few the last 2 years. They were doing the construction project, and I was urged not to have weddings in the chapel because of all the construction. But I would say I averaged 5 a year. So if you were to figure 5 times 40, probably 200 anyhow.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and it's an honor, too. In fact, I won't give the name. It'll be embarrassing, or might be to them, but there was one couple I had a great privilege of working with in their dating life and did their wedding, and they just stopped by before they went off for stationing. I won't give the location, but they said, "Just for the record, our first child's being named for you." And I said, "Are you expecting?" They said, "No, not yet, but just so you know." And that's where you kind of go to bed saying, "My goodness, what an honor that kind of a thing is, too," where folk you've had the privilege of serving think of you when they're gone. That's just
I would call that a good day. That's a really good day.
The school's called the Wick, Randy.
Right, and, there you go. I
live on Winter Street, and I'm a ski instructor for PSIA, so go figure.
It doesn't surprise me that they would do that, though, because you've been there through so many highs and lows for so many of us, the weddings and the funerals. And institutionally, after 30 years, you've been there for some highs and lows of the school as well. Are there any that...
You may also recall, Randy, that I had a crossed eye for the first 11 years of my life, so the left eye is essentially blind, which is why I couldn't serve militarily. And to that end, that's why I wear no rank in my uniform. I just have the cross because I wasn't going to wear rank I didn't earn. Students say, "Do we salute you or not?" I say, "That's your call. It's entirely up to you." But in that same sense, this has been my life. Since I haven't had a chance to serve militarily, the Lord gave me 30 years of serving not just our traditional students, but certainly those that go off to Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and to serve them. That's been, if you will, by proxy, my military service on this side here on our campus.
What are the significant events, or the 30 years, major ups and downs? If you look back, which ones sort of stand out the most to you?
Hardest or easiest, or which one you want, Randy?
Either one. Which one pops into your mind first?
I would think that horrible car accident years ago on the Canadian border where we lost 5 students. They had gone to Montreal to party. They were of age up there, not down here. had a designated driver to drive, and the driver fell asleep at the wheel coming down across the border, hit a concrete abutment there, and they were killed. And so that was probably the hardest, losing that many precious people at the same time. The high point, my goodness, I would say every year's got certain ones that are so special. Probably the most humbling one, Randy, was, as you know, I had cancer recently, and one of the students, now a graduate, said, "Can I put this on Facebook?" And I'm a Facebook stalker. I don't post much. So I said, "Certainly." And oh my goodness, the cards and notes and letters that I received from around the world were absolutely shocking, and I was dumbfounded. That just gave me the insight that sometimes working behind the scenes has a lot more value than being up front. So like a stagehand, without the stagehand, the play can't go on. I'm a happy hole filler. I'm just happy to fill holes and be there for folks when they're in good times or bad times. But probably the high point was the surprise that after 30 years, the great grace and kindness of our graduates caught me off guard, Randy.
Well, it shows you how much you mean to us. And if you can mean a lot to people over an extended period of time, like 30 years, you're obviously doing something right.
My goal was just to be a signpost pointing to the Lord. I've seen too many people in my profession, and it becomes their ministry or their church. And I went in ministry a long time ago to point as an ambassador to Him. And my greatest fear is doing something to bring disrepute to His name, in a word that wasn't appropriate or an action. And so I think of a passage in the Old Testament where a lady is talking about this prophet of God that's walking by her, and I guess she didn't know his name, and she said, that man of God over there. And I'd like to think whenever our time at the school ends or the Lord takes me home at some point, that at least as an ambassador for the Lord, that I brought a good feel to his name and represent him correctly and introduce people to the consideration of making him Lord and Savior. That's my greatest desire. And my greatest fear is to mess that up.
To your point about service, too, you've, as chaplain, have helped accommodate religious services for how many different religions at this point? I remember one time, and this was some years back, we were sitting in your old office talking about it, and you had it all printed out, and it had to be 15 different religions on there. Probably,
and I've had some, colleagues say, "How can you serve as an evangelical chaplain by training and do all that?" I said, "Look, I've never been asked to change my convictions. In chapel, I'm free to teach the word carefully, but I also believe that the best way to open the door to sharing one's faith is to meet other people's needs." And so I've taken some Jewish students to synagogue. Of course, I have a background in my Hebrew training, so I would open the Tanakh and I could follow along with what was going on.
Interesting. You've seen a lot of people come and go. Remember the meltdown of 91, which led to, you've seen a lot of commandants over the years. Major change from President Schneider, or from President Todd to President Schneider. What was your recollection of that change? And do you have any hopes or worries for the change we're about to go through with the new presidential search?
Well, certainly different people serve at different times with different gifts. I've seen the same thing in local churches where one person may be strong in one way, someone strong in another. So I would say that President Todd and his dear bride, and also Rich Schneider, President Schneider and Jamie, they were all very gracious to Deborah and me the whole time we've been here. I think in leadership style, certainly Rich walked in to a school that needed to do some financial repair. It was hemorrhaging. I believe that the school was like $3 million in the hole. And so his expertise, as has been proven for some 28 years, is going out raising support for the school. I jokingly say probably the first thing he will not do when he retires this spring is get on the aircraft and stay in a hotel. He's probably had his fill of that. So to your question, I would say that both of them brought their expertise for what was needed at the time. But there's no question that for the longest standing, I think, Vermont president in our state, Rich's consistency, his love for our school, his tenacious work ethic has, as some people have said, saved the school. He would say that no one person saves our school, and that's probably true. But certainly having a network of support, getting good people on the board of trustees, great advisors, he has certainly surrounded himself with people like that and tried to do the best, and has made a difference. To your question of the next stage, I have no idea who we have coming as potential candidates. I guess there's down to between 2 and 4 people who will start the interview process, I believe, in just 2 weeks. There's some sessions planned for Whitechapel, open sessions for them to meet the candidates. So a lot of folks are praying for the right person, and I'm certain that after the great work that's been done under Rich for the last 30 years, that the team who's working on choosing the next president has their work cut out for them, but probably in most groups, you have a big group that apply, and then there's like 10 that come to the top, and I've got 3 or 4. So I'm sure they've got some great candidates, and I'll watch to see as will the rest of our campus.
It's a small pool of people who have the qualities and skills to even submit their application. You know, I mean, you need to be a lot of different things for that job, don't you?
Well, you have to be a people person. As I notice, even in church work, that if they don't care for you, financial support is dead. And people give to faces, not so much to organizations. And so if they don't trust the leadership or don't trust the individual or have no rapport with them, they're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So I would believe that whoever comes in needs to be someone who is absolutely devoted to our school, probably with the Corps of Cadets, a military background, and with the faculty, someone who has an academic background of some sort. Probably the faculty want a PhD, but I also know that PhDs often are very specific in their own field and not as broad as all of education. So I would think someone with a good master's or a couple master's degrees would certainly be able to do the job. Whether or not that's what the faculty would want, I can't answer for them. But certainly a military background to understand the mindset and the thought life of those who go off to harm's way and put their lives on the line for our republic.
You and I have talked about this a couple of times over the last 10 or 20 years. When you do retire, who or what will replace you?
I have no idea, Randy. I don't know if I'll have any input to that or not. I'd like to think that someone who has a gracious spirit towards other groups and faiths, at the same time, someone who comes in with their own training and holds their convictions. You've known me long enough to know that I got some pretty strong convictions, but also I would impart those to rather than impose those things. I had an interaction, for example, with a faculty member one day who said to me, "You aren't for diversity." I said, "Well, by your definition, that's probably true, because as a theologian and as a pastor, I believe there's truth and error, so I don't support all points of view. I have my convictions." Having said that, I said to this gentleman, "Well, you're for diversity." He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "So why don't you support me?" I said, "If you're for diversity, I'm part of that." Mm-hmm. And he had no response, to which I added, "Now, I'm for charity. I defy you to show that I've not cared for anyone in need on our campus if I became aware of their need, regardless of what their background is." So I said, "Who's being consistent, you or me?" And he kind of stormed off. So to your comment there, I think it has to be someone who has strong convictions, or you end up giving messages that have no content. Affirming all things, believing all things, at some point, you've got to draw a line in this thing. You measure change against a constant. And so I think it has to be someone who has a good training in his or her own field, but also who understands in a secular campus or in Vermont, which is the least churched state in our country, to work in such a way that even if they disagree with you, they'll appreciate that your care is there for all the student body, faculty, and staff. I guess technically my job has me serving faculty, staff, administration, students. I'm not sure there's a line drawn where I don't have an access to folks in those areas if there's a need.
So you'd be okay with any religion chaplain as long as they serve the Corps the way you have for the last 30 years?
I guess I wouldn't say that, because there's so much right now anti-Christian happening in our country that I think that it's almost you can have anything except being a Christian. And part of it's because some believers have dug their own hole in not showing the grace of the Lord. But I would certainly, given the fact of what our nation has been historically, still would prefer someone with Christian training. I think, for example, in chapel, although I serve non-denominationally and serve our whole campus that way, the other groups that would come on our campus, if you had someone that was not of a Christian faith, I think you would probably kill the evening chapel services, both Catholic or Protestant or non-denominational, because other folk would say, why would I go to someone who doesn't share the training they were raised in that way? So I do facilitate getting rides off campus to houses of worship for folk, whatever their background. I've taken kids down the road to the Buddhist place in Roxbury. Again, I mentioned going to synagogue in Stowe. So serving that way, but I would still opt for someone who has a Christian training. I would still opt for that. Like, I can't fudge on that one.
You know what, though? I'll credit you with that, and that to me is so non-surprising because I've known you so long. Now, that answer for some will be controversial, and I would say, why? What'd you think he was going to say? I mean, you're sort of like a what you see is what you get kind of guy. And theologically, I mean, I am not exactly a person of faith. You and I have had many discussions over the last 30 years, but I know that you walk your talk. So the answers, I've never been surprised by an answer you've given on anything. That makes perfect sense to me. What are the chances? Well, what are the chances they just replace you with a counselor or something like that, a secular counselor?
We have counselors on campus who do a great job, but I will tell you that often the students come to my office, even the unchurched or de-churched, say, Rev, what do you think? And they're coming down knowing I'm a chaplain. I think they're looking beyond just the counseling spot to someone who has a theological or a base that's not just of their own. Mm-hmm. I don't give my own philosophy. I take it from what the text has to say, and some things I would teach in this day and age would be controversial or not accepted, but I didn't write the text, and so my role is to graciously proclaim what's there. But I think when they come down by their own decision to the office, often I give an answer I always give an answer which is the hardest answer. And they often say, I thought you'd say that, to which I say, why'd you come down here? Well, and I believe what they want is someone who wasn't going to fudge. They can take or reject the offer I give as a suggestion, but when they come down, I got to tell you, no one ever comes in the office wanting me to give them a wishy-washy answer. Again, by wearing no rank in my uniform and no power broker, I'm not there to impose it or push it down their throat. Mm-hmm. But I think they would be disappointed if I waffled and didn't give a clear answer. And that's where my study of the Old Testament, both in the Hebrew text and Greek, the New Testament, they really come to say, what does the text have to say? What do you believe I should do? And I'll convey what the text says and leave it to them to apply it.
Okay. When you look back over the last 30 years, how do the challenges that you've helped, specifically Rooks, deal with in '89, how have they changed up until now, 30 years later?
I think by and large our society has lost the commitment to discipline that my generation at least had when I was a boy. And so in that respect, the students who come here want that. Like I've had many students say they wish their parents had been more strict than they had been. And they come here wanting to have that structure placed in. But from the milieu of what they come out of, I think that the adjustment is huge compared to what it may have been when you came in years ago. And so the structure is still there, but there are schools, for example, where rather than A, B, C, D, F, it's just a portfolio successfully completing, and they get their first exam and they fail, and they go, what do you mean I failed? I took the test. And so that sense of the ice water in your face that you can fail at something, you get up and try it again, that's probably the biggest challenge, let alone folks coming in that are not physically in shape. I think that it's Great Britain where before they do basic for their military folk, they have a pre-basic to get them in shape to do basic training. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is in our country because, again, my eye, not having a chance to serve actively myself. I went for a 2-mile run tonight down on the track. Well, I might call it more of a walk jog, but I'm still getting back into this after my cancer surgery. But there again, to go out there and just do some exercise with no one telling you have to, that sense of imparting to this generation a commitment to do the harder thing might be the biggest challenge. It was always hard here. What I would add to that, I was asked by a number of Rooks this year, looking back over my 30 years, was it really harder back then, Rev? And I say, well, it was actually more stupid back then. It might be a better term for that, but there were some things that happened back then, even when you were here, that should never have happened, really. And
there's plenty. Yeah. Hey, I have episodes on those.
Yep. And so in that respect, I think it's gotten more professional. We've gotten beyond wanting the drunken soldier, sailor and so on. You have to do it in a way because the military has downsized. They want people who can think on their feet and not cause more difficulty than what we're already facing.
Absolutely.
All our deployments.
Mm-hmm. Major shifts in society and the military there. So to be fair, that was asking the rookies, what are their challenges, what are their problems? What about us? What about the grads that you've dealt with over the last 30 years who call you still for counsel? How has that changed, and what kind of things are we dealing with now? Just so people know that they're not alone if they're going through something now.
The first thing is that folk who've been out for a number of years, who have served our nation militarily, and now are retiring, it's like, what do I do with my life now? That's one of the things I'm getting. In fact, I was talking to a Norwich grad, again, I won't give a name, but as I talked with him and his wife, I did their wedding when they were students here, and he's now 50 and did his 20 years militarily, and I said, wait a minute, you're 50? What happened here? What they're facing is, of course, raising the kids in a generation where a lot of the pressures societally, drug-wise, the vaping thing, the free sex type thing, which began back in the 60s, the consequence of that with STDs, the financial challenges.
A lot of addiction, suicide. Yeah.
Yeah, and suicide, there's awfully copycat suicides. And I would say that in that respect, facing a generation of raising kids, if they lose their girlfriend or boyfriend, they want their life to end. My life's not worth living. And so the sense of linear thought, A to B to C to D, it's now punctiliar. Think of the commercials on TV where there's all these images every 3 sections that change. Kids can hold diametrically opposed convictions and not realize they clash with each other. So that frustration for parents of trying to think logically through an issue where they're not following a kind of a process of analysis. That's probably the bigger one. Other than that, it's the typical situation where parents had not pushed their kid to see a task through to its end that they didn't want to do, that took a lot of time, and so Rookton hits them in the face, and they want to quit because they're not happy here. And say, you thought Rookton would make you happy? So in that respect, the biggest challenge for Rook here is still working with parents who the kids are wearing them down, and they wanted to say, I can't take this anymore, Chaplain. And I say, you have to take this. Make them see it through to its end. Mm-hmm. But the other one is a job change. There are some folk who've had their professions, their training from Norwich, and did it well, but found that it wasn't fulfilling for them. So they're still looking for something to fill that gap in their life. And they'll often call me and talk about that, and I go back realizing that many of them who call had no faith background at all, and they call, Rev, can I talk to you about this issue? And so I'm finding...
And why is that, do you think?
Most of the questions are the spiritual question that was never asked when they were students here.
But why would a secular person call for the question, though? For maybe not even a religious question, but just a life advice question. The only answer I can think of is that they trust you.
Well, let's face it, my friend, that the foundational quality for any relationship isn't love, it's trust. And how fast can trust be lost immediately over something stupid? And so in that sense, giving the harder answer, not in your face, but with an embrace to someone, say, let's do the right thing. Looking back on my 66 years, I got to tell you, as I came to an ethical, moral, spiritual decision, the hardest option has always been the right one. And I've tried to think of an example where that wasn't the case, and I can't think of one. So in that respect, those who call, I guess, without me knowing, have watched our lives a lot. Like one kid, actually not a kid, one graduate said, Rev, you're in a fishbowl. How do you handle that? I said, I guess I'm a fish. Fish live in fishbowls. If we are what we're supposed to be, and again, I'm a sinner by nature too, but I've given my life to the Lord. If we are what we're supposed to be, then all of us look for what's genuine, not what's fake. I saw a sign on the front porch of a house. We shoot every third salesman. The second one just left. I just cracked up seeing that. But I also would say in that respect, I'm not here to sell something. I'm trying to embody that. I should be the sales product, not the salesman. And in that respect, when even unchurched or de-churched folk call, when they stop by the office, they know who I am, what I stand for. But they also, I'm not going to push it down their throat, but they also want someone to be specific and be focused and not just give a generic answer that they can't decide or delineate what's being said here.
Okay.
So in the same sense, when it comes to life, give me some principles or some specifics I can react to. Yeah.
Okay. I want to be respectful of your time. Just a couple of quick things here. Just a few more things. I had to ask you if you remember this story. I was a sophomore, Reggie runner, and it was Rook Week, maybe the first day there, or second day there, and we were over in, I believe it was Dodge or Patterson Hall, and there was a recruit who came, and I can remember his name. I don't want to say it, even though he didn't last there, and he was odd beyond belief, but he had pentagrams tattooed on his neck, and when they did the amnesty box at night, when they let people, you can get rid of the stuff you're not supposed to have and no questions asked, there was stuff in there, voodoo dolls and just some scary stuff. And I remember being there, and they of course, I'm the sophomore corporal, so they just looked at me and they're like, go call the Rev. I remember I called you. Do you remember this story?
I do.
I knew you would. So you came up there, and I remember you came into the room, and it was me, you, and I can't remember, 2 or 3 other people. When they hear this, they're going to remember, and people will remind me of where it was. And I remember you're looking at this stuff, and everybody in the room just being scared to death. What do you remember about this?
I've got to tell you something on that. I do believe there is a real demonic realm. Scriptures are clear. Even Christ was tempted by Satan, so I don't play with that. I have friends who are missionaries in other parts of our world who would tell you stories that put your hair on end. And to that, the Scriptures are quite clear about we're not to consult with mediums or spiritists. It's very, very clear. Why? I don't believe the Lord is saying avoid something that's not real. And so in that respect, I took it seriously. Some would laugh at that, but there's clear indication in the Scripture of Christ facing demonic opposition and having to work on people who are influenced strongly by demonic activity. Interestingly, one of the words in the Greek language for demonization is the word pharmakia. What does that sound like?
Pharmacy?
Pharmacy. Yeah. Do I see a relationship between line-expanding drugs and influenced by the demonic realm? I absolutely do. And so I do recall that. I also know some thought I was silly for taking it too seriously. I took it very seriously. My friends who are serving overseas in cultures, again, I won't mention because their lives are in danger if they were found out, who come back and tell me stories that put my hair on end.
Do you remember the claim that this guy was making? He was actually, he didn't speak a lot of English. Strangely, there were a bunch of people who said, oh my God, I saw that guy today. He walked to Norwich up 89. People saw him on the highway walking, but his claim was that with this voodoo stuff that he had killed Papa Doc de Valier, the Haitian dictator who had just died.
Right.
This was just an odd episode. I knew you'd remember that one. Did that ever happen again? Did that ever happen again or anything like that?
I can't comment, Randy.
Okay.
There are folk who would like you to keep for their benefit things. I will certainly say that has not been a unique experience in my 40 years of ministry, both outside of our school and in our school. I do believe that I was asked by one person considering ministry, Rev, do you ever feel like you're under spiritual attack? I said, every day. I said, it's not so obvious. Think about having a light on in your truck all night long. It's not much of a drain, but in the morning the battery's dead. And so a lot of the stuff that I would face is that subtle drain and trying to attack in ways you don't expect, where we have to keep our guard up or like water through a crack. Some of those influences can work in our way, in our heads and our minds, and take us off base. I'm a sailor, as you know. Mm-hmm. If I were sailing in the ocean and couldn't see land, it was like 1 degree off of true north. That's only 1 degree, but after 3 days of sailing, you're way off course. And so there again, with all of this stuff, when the Scriptures say avoid it, I may not always understand why, but I say, I think I'll take the Lord's word for it, and I'll stay away from this stuff. I'm not getting near it. Which also means I was asked that same time that we referred to, Rev, would you do any exorcism? I said, I don't get near that. I'm not strong enough spiritually to take that one on. I would never try that on my own.
Not since the movie.
In the book of Jude, Archangel Michael says, I won't challenge Satan. I figure I'm not going to try what the Archangel Michael wouldn't do.
All right, we're going to move into the last part. This is the funnest part. This is a game called Bad Choices. Everybody's played it. What it is I'm going to give you two choices. You got to choose one of them.
Okay.
So if I said butterscotch cookies or ice cream, you would obviously go with the butterscotch cookies, I believe.
Oh, but you haven't. It's chocolate butterscotch.
Oh, I'm sorry. I messed that up. You know what's funny?
Mrs. Rev's famous chocolate butterscotch cookies, hands down.
I told my son, I said, hey, I'm talking to Reverend Wick tomorrow night. And he goes, And I said, remember the guy up at Norwich? And he goes, was he the guy in the church? I said, yeah. And he goes, was he the guy that gave us the cookies? I said, yep, that was him.
Oh, by the way, on that same note, with the Alumni Weekend, the second century anniversary, I told Deborah, I said, a lot of our graduates will be back asking about your cookies. So she cooked up a whole batch and I had it under my desk. So I told all the graduates I saw, go back to my office. It's unlocked under the desk. Get a cookie. And
you had a huge.
There was nothing there. They were gone.
There was a duffel bag. Mm.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I'm going to go bad choices. Got to choose one of them. Alden Partridge or Ernie Harmon. It's not supposed to be easy.
Wow. I guess without Alden, we wouldn't be here. But Ernie certainly, I guess, the legacy and the myth about him.
These are going to get harder. I'm just telling you.
You're going to die by burning or die by drowning? I'm not sure I can answer that one, Randy.
Okay.
I think that's just too hard to answer. Like, you want a steak? Or
I'm gonna make it harder. What I usually do is I tell them, all right, Partridge or Harmon. They choose, Harmon, let's say, and I say, okay, Harmon or Schneider, and then they go, ooh, and so Partridge, Harmon, and Schneider. We'll just agree that they can go on the Norwich Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I think the three of them, without any one of those, we wouldn't be here today.
Okay, horses or tanks?
Oh, tanks.
Tanks.
Hey, Colonel Donovan would love me to see M1A1.
Specifically, I'll make sure he knows that. Morning PT or afternoon PT?
Both.
Both. Okay. Football or hockey?
Oh, wow. I've been in football. I never played hockey, but Norwich, it's a religion at Norwich. I guess for the benefit of my job here, I'll say hockey. But I announce the football games. You know that, too.
I know. All right. The record or the guide on?
Oh, the guide on, the bastion of truth.
I love that. Most people are saying that. That's good.
But you know, because you've posted the first episode that had me in there where they spelled Chaplain Witch, W-I-C-H, and Chaplain was C-H-A-P-L-I-N. So they had both words wrong.
Hey, that was back in the printing press days. All right, next one. Buck or pinhead?
I prefer be a buck.
Okay. Gray tunic.
If it's good enough for Gordon Sullivan for 4 years, it's good enough for me.
Okay, gray tunic or dress blues?
Tunics ruin your neck. It's the most miserable, blues.
Okay. So this is a prediction. You don't have to choose. Do you think the next president will be a man or a woman?
I don't know, but the names that I've heard about, and I shouldn't know about, I've not heard a female name yet. There could be someone in the loop, and I shouldn't even know the ones that have come my way. But people often talk without thinking or know. I'll keep my mouth shut. So I think that the real issue, think of Margaret Thatcher in London and so on, too. We're looking for someone who's capable to do the job. Mm-hmm. And they have to have a heart that's soft and a skin that's thick, not a thin skin and a hard heart. So I don't know. I would just say the person has got to love our school, give clear direction.
I'm going to pin you down. But just a prediction. We're not going to hold you to it. It's just like choosing the Super Bowl. If you had to choose one, what are you going to guess?
I would choose someone with integrity, whoever that person would be, and I could serve with either one.
Right.
I know that there has been a great difference in presidents, from Loring Hart to General Todd to Admiral Schneider. I wouldn't be surprised if they found someone who was a female or a person of color. I think that I would not be surprised if our school went either way or a combination of both. I would not be surprised at all.
I think it's probably going to be a woman. The one I can't figure out is whether they'll have military experience or not. But so here, listen, this is the last ones. You got to choose on these. These are specific to you, and this may test our friendship a little bit, right? Sailing or skiing?
Oh, I'd have to say ski. My dad taught me to sail, but I'm so ready for snow. I like cold weather, so I'm in Vermont. Bring it on.
Okay, this one's really important. If you could get one thing back on campus, which would it be? Would it be the ski slope right across from your house or the crow's nest?
Oh, yeah, the days of the crow's nest and the fake recognitions. I remember that, too.
Fake recognitions. Yeah.
I think financially, I'd love to have the ski slope, but that wouldn't be something they couldn't afford because of the culture material. I guess they would say crow's nest. But I would still say over that, I'd go for the MCD gates.
Okay. We're going to we'll write that one in.
Where are the MCD gates? Where are they?
No idea. What if you could talk to yourself on your first day of work at Norwich 30 years ago and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Listen well first. Earn the right to speak. But when you're given that right, don't be afraid to speak. But listen first. Too many folk come in to change things around before they've learned the culture. And I think it's crucial to listen to the folk who've been there first, realize that we're the newbie with new ideas, but some of those new ideas may have been tried before with disastrous effects. So get people who have been there enough to give you the insights, but then after you've watched and observed and learned the culture, the subculture, the esprit de corps, be decisive. Otherwise, as the scriptures say, with no vision, people perish. You have to make the call and live with the consequence, but do it.
Good advice.
But listen first. Too many. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Can I bother you for a quick prayer for the Corps, past and present?
I would certainly do that. Lord, I ask for the school that has been the birthplace of ROTC and the Corps that now is 1,500 people strong and more students coming. I pray for them to have the integrity to do what they say they would do, that the upperclassmen would not just do the principles when they're rooks, but do it as upperclassmen and lead by example. And by doing that, people would knock the doors down to get in this place. May the school continue for its principles and with honor. The largest word on our ring may not just be a word that's on a ring, but in our hearts and in our lives. I pray this in your name.
Amen. People want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Daytime at the office, 802-485-2128, between 10:30 and 6. Nighttime here at the house, between 8 and 10. Phone calls are always welcome. And most of my calls are after midnight. Mm-hmm. Nothing good happens after midnight.
Right.
So I'll say that.
Right.
I would say this, that if an email comes in, an email will go back out as quick as I can.
Oh, yeah. You are an early riser. You and I have exchanged more emails at 4:30, 4:45 in the morning than during the day, I think.
Well, if it's a clear night, I'll be in my observatory any night, too. So I have an 11 inches, Smith Cassegrain telescope, so sometimes I don't even bother going to bed at nighttime.
I appreciate your time, Bill. That was him, Reverend Wick. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. He will definitely be back at some point. There's lots of things to unpack in there. I'd love to go into a little bit deeper with him. So a very special thank you to Reverend Wick for his time and loaning his support to the show here. If you have any questions, problems, concerns, complaints, anything like that, please direct them to the appropriate personnel. Other than that, I'll see you in the next episode.